You just had yourself a look at the exterior of the Nissan Rogue Sport. And when you look at it, it's a little bit smaller than the regular Rogue, but that's okay because this is a smaller crossover. It's definitely not bad looking. It's not going to stand out to the point where somebody's going to be like, oh, that is hideous or grotesque. But most people aren't going to give it a second look. It blends in without being totally boring. And that's what the Rogue is about, and that's why they sell so many. Now, the big highlight is, you're not going to spend too much time playing around, looking at the headlights, the taillights, the grille. You're going to spend most of your time sitting on the inside. With the Sport, there's a lot of good inside and plenty of things that Nissan's done well for the past 15, 20 years, and some things they still don't do too well. So let's go over some of the details of that. Now, I know I look too cool for school. Let's talk about this. The steering wheel controls, simple. I just got out of a Subaru Forester and I thought, there are so many buttons on here, it's ridiculous. I don't know what I'm hitting. Here, it's simple. Volume, your menu context controls, your forward and backward, your back buttons, your safety button, it's all easy to get to. Your headlight design, the stalks are what you've been using for the past 30 years. You have a volume control knob. Granted, the volume control knob is recessed too far in, so it's kind of hard to grip onto. Same with the tuning knob, but at least they're here. The menu buttons on the side of the infotainment are easy to get to. It's all physical. You have a one-touch button to dim the screen and to turn it off completely by holding it. More manufacturers need to do that. Now, granted, this has a lot of backlight bleed. This is not the best screen in terms of contrast ratios or black levels, but it's usable. All the other buttons and controls are great, including your HVAC knobs. It's all done down here. It's not relying on any touch screen. It's not reliant on any screens at all. You can see exactly what your temperature is here, and it's great. Everything functions properly. Now, where it starts to fall apart is some of the quality is not so good in here. The plastics don't seem to fit good. The shift boot just falls off when you put it into gear sometimes, and you can just pull it off on accident. I mean, there's no excuse for that, despite some of the good quality pieces in here. Namely, when you spec this out, this thing's like $32,000, and that is not cool for that price range. But your seat heater buttons, they're not digital. You can kind of like toggle it, lock it in. It stays on all the time until you turn it off, which means when you start the car up, you don't have to worry about the system kicking it on or off. The shifter has physical detents. There's no digi shifter. Most of the storage spaces are good, the cup holders. The only weird thing is like the armrest has this kind of stitched place on the center of it. So when you rest your arm here for too long, you get an indent in your skin from the way that the stitching is. That's something I found on longer drives. But really everything else. You have a heated steering wheel, which isn't typically found on cars in this price range. Most everything works the way that you would expect it to, and the electronics aren't overburdened. It's more of an industrial design, but at the same time, I feel like it's quick and easy and logically laid out to use, despite it not looking the prettiest. And that's what you want from a vehicle like this. If you're going to use it every day, you don't want to have to think about some of this stuff. And that's why I like the Rogue more so than some of the other competitors. They're not trying too hard to burden you with that. Now, in terms of cargo capacity and space, it's pretty good. You have a flat floor with the cargo trays, and then when you take it out, it gives you a little bit extra depth. And the back seat room is okay. It's not the greatest. I don't sit too far forward, but if you're taller like Jack is at 7'9", he could barely fit his legs back there. But he's a big boy, and we'll talk about more of that later when we get to the bathroom segment. But let's head into the shop and take a look at this car on the lift. You are looking at the Rogue Sport on the Benpack lift. This Japanese manufactured vehicle is the smaller sibling to the regular Rogue. It's just shorter. It has less cargo capacity. It's supposed to be more nimble and agile in the city. And what really it is, it's kind of like the CRV and the HRV, only they use the Rogue name on the larger one and the small one, and the smaller one gets the Sport name, which is kind of nonsensical compared to how other people do it, but that's what it is. And when we look at the underbody, you see a lot of tried and true components that you would find in a more affordable crossover. Everything is stamped steel here on the front half of the vehicle. You have a strut front suspension. Everything's covered up. You have to drop this panel to do oil changes. And Pretty much all the way back, you see a little bit of covering to reduce NVH, but nothing out of the ordinary here. Let's take a look at the back. Now, while this is slightly cheaper than the regular Rogue to start, what you get, independent rear suspension, something that's disappearing off more affordable vehicles in order to save cost, if you can believe it. But this has an independent rear. The coil springs are separated from the dampers, and this trailing arm has a strange location for its toe adjuster. It's kind of outboard, which makes me wonder if it's going to hold up to corrosion, but owners will soon see later on. Everything else here looks pretty standard in terms of Nissan. The only thing you notice that's aluminum is the upper control arm, but your knuckle design is cast steel. Everything else is stamped steel back here, including the carrier. But if you opt for all-wheel drive, you get this on-demand system, and it does make a difference, in my opinion, in terms of drivability. Now, granted, this is supposed to be the smaller city crossover, so you don't necessarily need all-wheel drive in all circumstances, but people really are hooked on that right now, and you do have the option for it, but you have to pay a little bit more. Now, in keeping with the theme of the Sport, you also have a downsized engine compared to the regular Rogue at 2 liters instead of 2.5. However, Nissan claims this has best-in-class, or one of the best-in-class torque levels for this size of a naturally aspirated motor at around 147 pounds of torque, and nobody cares about any of that at all. The specs really don't matter with a vehicle in this range or price. It matters how it drives. Now, this is direct injected only. There's no port or dual injection here, and it is mated to a CVT. And out of any manufacturer, I see comments complaining about CVTs and Nissans the most. And I feel like the engine and the transmission here mostly suit the character of this. And this is supposed to be an affordable, practical vehicle that people are going to use every day. So I think a lot of this tech stuff is just pointless. Let's get it on the road and talk about how it drives and what you're going to like and dislike about it. Welcome to a lovely drive in the Rogue Sport. And so many people buy this. So many people buy the Sport and the regular Rogue that I can't believe it. It's one of the best-selling crossovers in America. And there has to be a reason why. I've been trying to figure it out, looking at it, the interior, the exterior, the underbody. And I'm starting to get it driving it. Now, if you're not getting the full-blown, spec'd-out version where you're spending over $30,000, it makes a lot more sense. Because what you're getting here is the ride comfort's pretty good. You have independent rear suspension, and the biggest thing I can tell you is this is a non-intimidating drive. You don't feel intimidated at all piloting this. It's simple, everything's easy to get to, and you feel instantly connected to the interior space. The next thing you're gonna notice, and this is cheesy to talk about, but steering. The steering is different on the Rogue because it is far more relaxed than most vehicles. Some manufacturers try to synthetically increase the force or the ratio where it's instantaneously responsive. So if you're on the highway, it becomes really darty, and the Rogue just has this extremely relaxed feel. You have to turn the wheel a little bit more to get it to turn. But I find that's another reason why this is a lot more simple to drive. Now, in terms of overall ride comfort, that's something people are going to be concerned about. How does it handle different pavement types? And I feel like the Rogue does a pretty good job. I wouldn't say that it's the best out of all the compact crossovers I've driven, but I feel like they find a pretty good balance between ride quality and stiffness, where you could literally, throw it around some turns and still have confidence to push it a little bit harder. And then the brakes are really natural. You have to get into them a little bit more deeply, but they're not an on and off switch. It's just a really kind of fun, simple drive. And I keep saying simple because everything about the Rogue is just, again, it's non-intimidating. There we go. It's probably going to be blown out a little bit. All right. Now, something else that you're going to be concerned about is transmission performance and engine performance. Let's check that out. Now you'll notice that this CVT is one of probably the worst in the market. And it's really well known that Nissan has a lot of dings against them for either reliability or just the way that they feel. This is the most rubber bandy, synthetically feeling transmission you're gonna get into. They've started to fake shift, and the fake shifts don't feel at anything at all like shifts in a traditional torque converted automatic. And I think it's really the biggest problem with the Rogue. It makes it feel much more slow than it really is, and just kind of strange and kind of up and down, and just an unnatural experience. I think if you can get over that, if you're just mostly putting this around and driving it very sedately, you're not going to notice that, because at the lower RPM range, when you're not trying to push this, it feels totally normal. Again, you're not going to notice it. But the concern is, they've downgraded the engine displacement on this compared to the regular Rogue. You have less horsepower, and that's one of the things you're going to notice. When I mash my foot down here, typically when you accelerate in most common four cylinders, you feel some sense of buildup. You feel literally no G-force. You feel no pushback. You feel like the car is just going insanely slow to build up speed. And that's pretty rare in the modern market of like the $30,000 range. I would say that this is more on par with what you would expect from something that was $18,000. So if you're really sensitive and you need more get up and go power, I would say you have to go to the regular Rogue over the Sport. Between the transmission performance and the engine performance, I think that's the worst part of this car, but the best part is pretty much everything else. Ride quality, the level of comfort, the simplicity and design. But instead of getting into all that, let's just go right to the final thoughts. Final thoughts on the Nissan Rogue Sport. Between the regular Rogue and this one, they sell hundreds of thousands of these a year. And I racked my brain during the production of this to try to figure out why. And here's some of the pros and also why I think they sell so many. If you went to a dealership today and you didn't do a lot of research and you only drove a couple cars, you get behind the wheel of the Rogue and you're like, well, it rides good. It handles well. It gets good fuel efficiency. The technology suite works well. The infotainment is pretty simple to use. It doesn't look like a total boring or a horrible mess. It does most things well. And I think that's why they're selling so many, because it's just, there's nothing so bad that you would walk away from it. And that's a huge pro, because maybe they weren't designing this to be the best thing ever, but they spread out enough of the good stuff all the way around it where most people are happy. Now, the negatives are this. It's a very kind of blah vehicle. It really is an appliance. The transmission performance with the CVT is getting worse and worse as other manufacturers are improving it. So like I said, if you're only using this as an appliance, you may never notice that. But if you like to drive a little bit more, ugh. The second thing is, like most Nissan products, the infotainment is below average, even though it is quick and simple to use. They have user tracking on by default, so you have to go in the infotainment and manually turn it off so they're not sending out your anonymous driving data to Nissan to harvest. And I think the other thing is, when you start to get in all-wheel drive in the upper trim levels, the value starts to drop off dramatically. You do not want to pay over $30,000 for this, because there's way too much competition. If you can get this for less money, all these things that I'm talking about that are pros shine even more. But the good thing about the Rogue, well, the model, the Rogue, is you have two different options. You have one that are more space concerned and don't need horsepower, and you have a bigger Rogue that fits more people, cargo, and is a little bit faster. Drive them back to back, see what you think, and take care. Hopefully this video was helpful.
I'm on my laptop right now. This is the gentleman you're leaving me for? Very well. I hate the savage geese. I'm going to show you how to get rid of them. Just like this.